significant crisis for the Taliban. Since last week, they have captured 10 provincial capitals and now control most of the north of Afghanistan. The Afghan president Ashraf Ghani appears to be failing in his attempt to unite a host of fractured militias against the Taliban.
The United States has again urged its citizens to leave Afghanistan immediately as the fighting intensifies. The U.S. Embassy in Kabul has told Americans to take commercial flights out of the country and has warned that its ability to assist them is extremely limited because of the security conditions. In April, the embassy ordered U.S. government employees to leave the mission in Kabul if their work could be done from elsewhere. In Russia, the head of a St. Petersburg-based institute researching hypersonic systems has been detained for suspected treason. A court in Moscow has ordered that Alexander Kuranov be held in custody for nearly 2 months while investigations are carried out. Russia has been developing hypersonic weapons in recent years. Vitaly Shevchenko from BBC Monitoring explains the nature of hypersonic weapons.
It's a missile that travels at extremely high speeds. And that's their advantage, according to officials in Russia. That's what makes them invincible and impossible to intercept. And to give an example of what sort of speeds I'm talking about, Kinzhal, one of Russia's hypersonic missiles, can travel up at speeds of up to 12,000 kilometers an hour.
The Israeli government is reported to have given initial approval for the building of more than 800 homes for Palestinians in the occupied West Bank. It's normally very difficult for Palestinians to get permission to build in what's called Area C, which covers most of the territory and is under full Israeli administrative control. Algeria's state prosecutor has ordered an investigation after a mob lynched a man accused of deliberately starting fires. The murder happened in the Tizi Ouzou area, which has been hardest hit as dozens of fires have raged across the country, killing 69 people. BBC News. Nigerian officials say 80 victims of human trafficking have been rescued in neighbouring Niger. They say the victims, most of them women, were being taken to Libya on way to Europe. Isaac Khaled reports.
The commander of Nigeria's anti-trafficking agency in the northwest of the country told the BBC that the suspected human traffickers had abandoned the victims in a bush and ran away while they were being tracked by security personnel. Most of the rescued victims are young women. They were found on Tuesday at a location in southern Niger on their way to Libya. They have now been taken back to Nigeria. The authorities say they are still trying to arrest the fleeing suspects.
Tigrayan rebels in Ethiopia have formed an alliance with the Oromo Liberation Army to fight the government. The deal heaps further pressure on the Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed, who's from the Oromo region. His forces have recently lost territory to Tigrayan rebels in the north. Until now, the Oromo Liberation Army, which wants self-determination for the country's biggest ethnic group, has had limited military success. The Greek Prime Minister has called for root and branch change to tackle global warming after parts of his country were devastated by the worst forest fires in years. Kyriakos Mitsotakis said the country's whole approach needed a complete rethink.
The climate crisis is here, and it shows us that everything must now change, from the orientation of the economy to our national energy policy, from the functioning of the state to the daily habits of citizens concerning the environment.
Emergency teams in northern India have now rescued thousands of people stranded by floods in the state of Uttar Pradesh. Boats have been sent in to pluck families from rooftops in hundreds of villages along the Ganges River. Uttar Pradesh, India's most populous state, is suffering some of its worst flooding in decades. BBC News. Hello, welcome to OS with Nuala McGovern on the BBC World Service. Good to have you with us. Thanks for tuning in. We're going to be talking about COVID-19, some of the headlines, some of the developments with Dr. Emma Hudcroft. She's known as the virus hunter, one of our regular guests. But I'm also just seeing some lines. I'm really curious how you feel about this. You know, the way New Zealand was held up, really, I suppose, as the poster child for how to handle a COVID-19 global pandemic. But Jacinda Ardern, the Prime Minister, has said she's pursuing a COVID elimination strategy indefinitely. So they're going to keep the borders shut for the rest of the year, and then they'll allow in people that are fully vaccinated from low-risk countries. It's pretty fascinating. I'd just love to hear from people who are from New Zealand, whether you're inside the borders or outside the borders. I know it's the middle of the night, but many of you in Australia and New Zealand get in touch with me and you tell me you're an insomniac, or you tell me you're working overnight and that you're listening, and I love that you are. So let me give you the WhatsApp number and maybe we can get your voice on. +44 77 30 75 1925 is the WhatsApp number. +44 77 30 75 1925. Let me know how it's going. So that is one aspect, of course, that we are talking about. But the other story is Afghanistan. It's a shocking one. As we see how the Taliban advance battles in major cities, 10 provincial capitals that have fallen, as we've seen. But I want to bring in my colleague Ambarasan Tharajan, who is our South Asia regional editor and has been watching developments very closely. Ambarasan, we were just hearing a little of you in the news bulletin there. Thank you so much for coming up to join us. You know, we're hearing about Herat and Kandahar, names that will be familiar to our listeners wherever they are in the world when they hear about the conflict in Afghanistan. What do you understand is happening now?
A short while ago, a provincial council member and a local journalist in the western Afghan city of Herat, they both told our colleagues there that the city has been captured by the Taliban militants. As you may know, it is a very fast-moving situation. Probably the situation could change if the government forces decide to come back. But as of now, as we understand, this is a big prize for the Taliban, who have launched a lightning offensive to capture many provincial capitals in the past 1 week. You know, this fighting has been going on for several months now. But what is happening now on the ground is not only significant, it is going to be far-reaching impact on the country and the population. The Herat city, for example, it's on the western side, close to the border with Iran. And there's fighting also going on in Kandahar as we speak, and in Lashkargah in the southern part. So the battlefield situation could change very quickly in the next few minutes or in the next few hours, basically.
And how do you understand how quickly these provincial capitals or cities have fallen?
There's a variety of reasons. For example, in some cities, the cities surrendered, or towns surrendered without a fight because the community elders there, they negotiated with the government forces because they saw what happened in the city of Lashkargah. Many buildings were damaged in the fighting. There were airstrikes, there were mortar attacks, and people were fleeing. A lot of civilians were killed. So this could go in the way of Syria's Aleppo or Idlib. What we saw, the total destruction if someone wants to recapture the city. So the community elders negotiated, and then the government forces retreated from some areas. In other areas, the forces simply did not fight. And pro-government militias, they surrendered and they switched sides as well in some of the cities. But in most of the cities, the Afghan army were not able to withstand the onslaught of Taliban. They've been making a sustained attack on the different cities. See, one thing, when you talk about the provincial capitals, it did not fall overnight because the Taliban have been capturing the surrounding districts for months. They captured vast countryside in the last 5 or 6 months. So according to some estimates, more than 2/3 of the country now under Taliban control. So when you are under a siege, the Taliban can infiltrate and then they can bring surprise attacks. And finally, it is very difficult to defend a city, any provincial capital, with hundreds of thousands of people. And that is what happened in the last 1 week when the first city started falling.
It's interesting that the cities as well that we're looking at closely this hour, Kandahar, as you mentioned, across the border from Pakistan, Herat across the border from Iran. I'm seeing the United Nations calling for an immediate and unconditional ceasefire. But what does it mean for Iran or Pakistan if Herat, as I think you're telling us, and also perhaps Kandahar does fall to the Taliban?
Well, the situation doesn't seem very straightforward as we speak because the Afghan government and the Afghan politicians, they accuse the Pakistan of supporting and arming and giving safe havens to Taliban leaders, and the Taliban itself, started in the religious schools of Pakistan 25 years ago. So, if a Taliban government, which will be probably friendly towards Pakistan, and Kabul, they're really, really critical of Pakistan about what's happening inside their own country and the way Taliban are progressing. With Iran, it is a bit more complicated because officially, Iran is, if you look at it, is a Shia Muslim country, and the Taliban are like Sunni Muslim insurgents. They are supposed to be fighting with each other or opposed to each other. But there are some reports suggest that there is hand dealing because some water flows from Helmand River, flows from southern Afghanistan river waters, they flow into Iran, so there is some sort of understanding and deal. This is what some of the Afghan politicians are saying. But the Taliban having captured all the border posts, most of the border posts around Iran and southern Pakistan, they do control now trade. They do get now the revenue. Now the two governments have to deal with Taliban. If they open up the border and the trade starts flowing, then that gives them recognition. So it is more in terms of economy, recognition, and also politics, how it will play out between Iran and Taliban and Pakistan and Taliban.
Ambarasan Rajan, thank you so much coming on, speaking to us, telling us, beginning to speak with people who are there that believe that Herat city has fallen to the Taliban, including the governor's office, I believe. Ambarasan, maybe we get you back towards the end of the hour. I know it's getting late where you are, but thank you so much for bringing us up to date with the developments that you are confirming. Right, let me stay with Afghanistan. There is, of course, this fear of a brutal return to the Taliban regime of the 1990s. There were public executions, stonings, girls banned from school. But what do the Taliban want for Afghanistan now? Well, the BBC's Yalda Hakim has met some key members of the Taliban leadership to find out more about how they say they will govern. We begin with a clip of Yalda's conversation with Taliban spokesperson Hauschildt.
There was in the past some mistakes that we have learned from, because at that time you were new to the world. To stop education of women and girls, that is not our goal. Of course, education is their right, and it is much needed. And when they receive education, of course, they have a right to work about schooling. According to my knowledge, though I'm not a religious scholar, it is very difficult to find a proof to stone a woman. If it is not impossible, but it is very, very difficult.
So maybe a somewhat softer message than we might expect. But let's hear from the other person, Yalda, that you spoke to, Commander Maulana Mohammed, leading 300 fighters in Helmand, and you were talking to him about girls going to school, which we can talk about, but also about law, order and justice. For example, if someone were to steal or to commit adultery, what should happen to them?
All this is clearly stated in the Quran. If someone steals, there's a punishment. For example, for some thefts, the punishment is cutting off the hand and foot. And if someone commits adultery, then they should be stoned. Not a single girl has gone to school in our village and districts because our area is very remote. The facilities don't exist, and we wouldn't allow it anyway.
I think that's quite difficult to listen to as well. But how do you understand it, Yalda, those two very different perspectives as you ask somewhat the same questions?
Ultimately, Nola, their perspective is more or less the same. You have one element of the Taliban, the political office, who sit in Doha. They're seasoned fighters, they're older, they have spent a lot of time living in exile. Sohail Shaheen has lived in exile for 15 years, and or rather for 20 years, since 9/11 he left. And he moved to Pakistan, and then he moved to Doha 15 years ago. He put me on the phone to his daughter, who goes to university. And he said to me, listen, if we wanted to take girls out of school, why would I educate my own daughter? So on the one level, we were seeing a more softer tone, but at the same time, he was saying to me when I asked him about public executions, for example, would we see a return of public executions in Kabul where children would be made to watch? He said, but as a Muslim, of course I do. and so should you. When I asked him about stoning, he said, well, it would be difficult to find a verse in the Quran, not impossible, but difficult. So that's where you get a sense that actually, ultimately, at the heart of it, their belief is the same. It's just the commander in the field is far more hardcore and radicalized.
And then, I suppose, what they will decide to do, this is just rumours, as you mentioned as well, Yelda, if there is an offer of a power sharing agreement with the Afghan government, if they're moving so quickly, whether that's something that they would even consider. I mean, listening to their voices and then also listening to other Afghans that are very afraid for their country being overtaken by the Taliban again. I'm trying to understand, like, what would a compromise look like? What would life even look like in Afghanistan if you have the Taliban controlling a significant part, if not all, of the country?
Nothing like what we see today. We're seeing so many young female reporters, hosts, commentators, activists, MPs who are telling us about the unfolding situation. They would be silenced. You would not see the people that you are seeing today on our television screens and our radio stations. Their voices would never be heard again. Because what power sharing with the Taliban would look like is a religious police would be formed. And this is what Sohail Shaheen told me, that they would then monitor the conduct of the people from what they wear to what they say. And already we're seeing in so many places that the Taliban are controlling, they're shutting down the media, they're telling people that they can only report on Sharia law, for example. So already we're seeing in places, districts, cities that they control, the silencing of people.
I think that the reporting has been just fantastic. Of yours also, I'll give a shout out to our colleagues, Gunter Fien, if people haven't seen his reports, and also Yana Pitenko. Follow them all on Twitter. You'll get connections to a lot of their reports there as well. And I just want to mention the Endless War as well, which you have been doing this special presentation on BBC.
That's right. We did this special today, Afghanistan's Endless War, and a point that General H.R. McMaster, Transformer National Security Advisor, made when he came and spoke to us was that wars don't end because one party has left. This war will continue. But my film, The Return of the Taliban, will be airing on BBC News Channel as well as BBC World this weekend.
Thanks so much to Yalda Hakim. As you mentioned, you try and catch that. I found it fascinating, kind of to get, I suppose, straight from the Taliban some of the thoughts on how they believe they are going to govern. I also mentioned Yana Pitenko. She has been reporting on the humanitarian crisis, and she has been with Sanjay Ganguly, who has been filming it. Fred Scott also filming with Gunter Fien, and you'll find all those pieces online as part of our coverage of this developing story. Listening to OS from the BBC World Service. We are live here in London. Let us take a look at some of the other stories being worked on by my colleagues in the BBC newsroom. At least 13 people have died and dozens more are trapped under debris after a landslide in the Himalayan district in northern India. Falling boulders swept a truck, a bus and other vehicles from a stretch of highway in the district. Rescue operations are being hampered by rocks that are continuing to fall. Oil giant Shell, will pay a Nigerian community $111 million over an oil spill that took place over 50 years ago. A spokesperson said the payment would mark the full and final settlement to the Ijama Abubu community over a spill in the 1967-70 Biafran War. And a postcard sent from South America has been delivered to its intended recipient 30 years after being posted. Bill Crocker sent the card from Chile in 1991 when he was serving with the Royal Navy, returning from the Falklands on board the HMS Cumberland. The card finally dropped on the doormat at his home of his father-in-law in Dorset in the south of England earlier this week. Right, let me turn to coronavirus. Dr. Emma Hodcroft is a molecular epidemiologist at the University of Bern in Switzerland. We like to talk to Dr. Emma every week about the latest developments and also answer your questions. So we started by answering this one that came in from us.
Hello BBC, this is me, Rajiv, currently living in Japan. My question today is, some of my Japanese friends are pretty concerned about the adverse effects of coronavirus vaccinations. So they are unwilling to vaccinated. Are there any adverse effects of vaccination? Please let us know.
So, the adverse effects, how come?
So thankfully, the adverse effects from COVID-19 vaccination are really rare and very small. The largest one that we're aware of is the one that's perhaps quite well known, that in some younger people, they get the AstraZeneca vaccination, just the AstraZeneca, they sometimes can develop life-threatening blood clots. But it's really important to note, this is very rare, and it is only in younger people, so it's very safe for older age groups to get this vaccine, which is really effective. For the mRNA vaccines, there's really been very, very few adverse side effects. And again, they're really rare. There's been a couple of reports of some cardiac difficulties in younger people, like teenagers, with some of the mRNA vaccines, but these have mostly resolved without a serious issue. And for everyone else, the most likely thing that might happen is that you feel a bit under the weather and have a sore arm for a couple of days. It's important to note that your potential outcomes from actually getting COVID are likely to be worse. And so the vaccine really is the much safer option.
Well, let me stay with vaccines. This was a news line instead that I think a lot of people in the States will be looking at, that the US drug regulators are set to clear a third dose of COVID vaccines for people with weak immune systems. They say they have a new study showing the benefits of an extra shot in transplant patients. So this will be the third shot for many people, I suppose maybe the second if they got the Johnson & Johnson.
This is a really tough topic because, of course, we want to up protection in people who might not have developed a full immune response, but at the same time, we have immunocompromised people and transplant patients all over the world. And that includes in countries where some of these people haven't even been able to get one vaccination, never mind be considered fully vaccinated after having two. And so I do think it's something we have to really weigh up carefully, because every third shot you give to someone in a wealthy country is a shot that isn't going to someone else in another country, and they might be just as vulnerable, but have had no vaccine. So I do think we need to be doing a better job at trying to get vaccine equity and better distribution of these vaccines all over the world.
We have another question actually kind of on that aspect of vaccine distribution.
This is Mohanji Shafat from Uganda. My concern is also about the vaccination. We have been taking various vaccinations, not of the same type, actually due to scarcity. Wouldn't this have an effect if one took a certain vaccination and then on waiting for a second dose he takes the other, not specifically the first one that he took? Wouldn't this have an effect on that person? Thank you.
So, worried about vaccine shortages, worried about mix and match vaccines?
So this is a great question. It's definitely one that's coming into play in some countries where they're giving one vaccine at first and then supply runs short and they switch to another vaccine for the second dose. Studies, really detailed studies on this are still ongoing, but preliminary work suggests that there isn't a negative effect from this. It seems like you at least end up with the same level of protection, and in some combinations it seems like you might even get better protection because you're seeing two slightly different vaccines. It might mean you have a little bit broader coverage of different viruses. But certainly there's no evidence right now that this would decrease how effective those vaccines are. So that really opens the door, hopefully, to getting more vaccines into more arms.
Understand. Speaking of more vaccines as well, the CDC, so the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention in the States, they're urging pregnant women to get the COVID vaccine, finding no increased risk of miscarriage. I know there was a lot of people that were trying to find specific information on this.
This is a really important recommendation because this is something that we're seeing a lot of misinformation, particularly on social media about. There's a lot of information circulating that people are saying the vaccine can harm your fertility or it might harm your baby, cause a risk of miscarriage, and there's actually no evidence that this is the case. It seems like getting the COVID vaccine is a really good idea if you're pregnant, because actually getting COVID if you're pregnant can be quite risky because it puts a lot of stress on your body, and that's not what you want when you're pregnant. There's also no evidence that the COVID vaccine decreases fertility at all, so it's really a good idea to get it even if you're pregnant.
And let me check, gosh, this is a terrible story. I've noticed it's been the most read on a number of places, I think the BBC as well. A nurse in Germany may have given more than 8,500 people saline solution instead of the COVID-19 vaccine doses. This is according to officials in the country's northern state of Lower Saxony. I think apparently she dropped a vial of the vaccine. I mean, that was some of it that I was reading. Those that are affected will be informed. It's such a shocking story. I hate to see it make a headline.
This really shocked me when I saw it. I think this is a really disappointing exercise in medical practice by this nurse. I mean, there's really no excuse, no matter what your feelings are about the vaccine. People there were showing up expecting to get one medical treatment, and instead they didn't receive any.
Thanks so much to Dr. Emma Hudcroft, our regular molecular epidemiologist from the University of Bern. I want to turn to wildfires now that are tearing through northern Algeria. They've killed at least 65 people, including 28 soldiers that were deployed to help the firefighters. We've been hearing from people affected by these fires in different parts of the world. Let's listen to a message we received from Algeria.
Hello everyone, I'm Dalia from Tizi Ouzou, Algeria. I hail exactly from Ethwasif, a mountainous region in La Kabylie. As you know, unfortunately, my village and neighboring villages, such as Larva, Nethirethe, Nethieni, Wadayan, were touched by wildfires since Monday. These fires caused hundreds of deaths. 65 people died, including 28 soldiers. Honestly, this tragedy affected all Algerian people. I have a family of mine who lost their home, they lost all their belongings, they lost their livestock. You know, those animals were a source of food, income, livelihood. It really touched us deeply, and as you know, these blazes don't only cause a physical harm, but also a mental trauma from this experience of emergency evacuation, especially for children. This tragedy really touched all of us deeply, all Algerian people.
Thanks so much for your message, Dalia, and I'm so sorry that people are going through that. We will talk about the region later in the programme with BBC weather presenter Matt Taylor, also talking about that record temperature that appears to be recorded in Europe, 48.8 degrees Celsius in Sicily. The last time it was Athens back in 1977 at 48 degrees. In half an hour, you can hear Outlook.
It took more than 70 years of failed searches to find the wreckage of the Titanic. The man who eventually discovered it tells Outlook that he thinks dyslexia gave him an edge over other deep-sea explorers.
At 19 GMT, we're on assignment.
I'm Yolande now in Israel, reporting on a murderous crime wave sweeping the country's Arab communities. Arab citizens are inflicting violence upon each other, but the resulting fear and suspicion threatens to poison relations with the Jewish majority.
That's followed by science in action.
The latest UN climate report was unequivocal about the way we humans are changing the world's climate and about the damage it's doing via extreme weather. CO2 is mostly to blame, but our expert says the quickest way to slow global warming is to reduce a different gas, methane.
That's all still to come from the BBC World Service. Hello, you're with OS with Nuala McGovern on the BBC. We continue to follow developments in Afghanistan, which are fast-moving. 10th provincial capital taken by the Taliban, but also reports of Herat falling to the militant group. Among those targeted by the Taliban are journalists and also people working in the media. So we're going to hear about the lives of two journalists on the dangers that they face while covering this story in their own home country. BBC News. The Taliban have captured Afghanistan's third biggest city, Herat, from government forces. They also appear to be on the verge of gaining control of Kandahar, the second largest city and the group's former stronghold. Their military offensive has been proceeding with startling speed. The capture of the two cities would be highly significant prizes for the Taliban. The United States has again urged its citizens to leave Afghanistan immediately as the fighting intensifies. The US Embassy in Kabul warned that its ability to assist them is extremely limited because of the security threat. In Russia, the head of a St. Petersburg-based institute researching hypersonic systems has been detained for suspected treason. A court in Moscow has ordered that Alexander Kuranov be held in custody for nearly 2 months while investigations are carried out. Nigerian officials say 80 victims of human trafficking, most of them young women, have been rescued in neighbouring Niger. They say they were being taken to Libya on their way to Europe. The Israeli government is reported to have given initial approval for the building of more than 800 homes for Palestinians in the occupied West Bank. It's normally extremely difficult for Palestinians to get permission to build in that area. Emergency teams in northern India have now rescued thousands of people stranded by floods in the state of Uttar Pradesh. Boats have been sent in to pluck families from rooftops in hundreds of villages along the Ganges River. The state is suffering some of its worst flooding in decades. Extreme weather in many parts of the world contributed to near record costs for the global insurance industry of $40 billion in the first half of the year. The estimated loss is the second highest total ever. And that's a summary from BBC News. Hello, you're very welcome to OS on the BBC World Service. And one of our main stories all this week, and it will continue to be, I think, as we see the developments come in, is Afghanistan. You were hearing a little in the news bulletin, perhaps with my colleague Amber Hassan earlier in the programme as well, that the Taliban have now taken the city of Herat. Battles continue for Kandahar as well, another strategically important city, and Lashkar, as we've been talking about as well. A lot of it is really people wondering whether this increases the likelihood that the Taliban could take the capital Kabul itself. These advances have been so fast. Amber Hassan at the Rajan is actually monitoring developments for us, and we may pop back to him before the end of the hour. But we are having conversations with the people who live there about what does this mean, and if there was a return to Taliban rule, what would that mean for their families or their lives or their careers. You might have heard some of our guests, Afghan women on Monday, then we had some students also on the programme. Today we want to speak to journalists. There has been an increase in attacks on those who work in the media in Afghanistan. According to the UN, they have a report that say more than 30 journalists have been killed in the country between 2018 and 2021, making it one of the most dangerous countries in the world to be a journalist. My colleague Carney Sharp has been speaking to two, Karim and Ali, they're both based in the capital, and Carney started by asking them to describe what it is like to do that job in Afghanistan right now. Karim first.
Afghanistan has been a dangerous place or a dangerous country for the journalists from 2001 up to now. We have lost more than 100 people working as a journalist and working for the media in the past 2 decades. But the situation which we are facing in the past 3 or 4 months, that is very difficult, and it is actually a different situation which came for us and for our working, for our colleagues and our friends in the media. We are losing every week one of our friends or one of our colleagues who is working for the media. So around the country, especially in Kabul, in the capital, we have targeted killing that's non-stop. It's going on, it's continuing. I myself and my colleagues fell dead every single day or every single hour when we are working, when we are at home, when we are with our friends or our family, and we don't have a picture of light and hope for our tomorrow.
Ali, everything that Karim says there, does that mirror your experience?
I think it mirrors the overall experience, and Karim is one of the best journalists in this country right now. I think part of the problem is that if you look at these journalist killings, it's been going on for a long time, and as Karim said, it's just gotten worse over the last few months or the last couple of years, and the problem still remains that oftentimes, there have been instances where the Taliban or the so-called Daesh or Islamic State forces claimed responsibility for these killings, but a lot of times it's just passed off as unknown gunmen. And even in the past, before it became something that was making daily headlines, it was something that it would be, someone on a motorcycle would come and kill a journalist. If there were investigations, they were never made public to us. Not even us as journalists knew who was killing so many of our colleagues in the media. There are so many instances that happen where it's just unknown. And recently, over the last year, the government has said, 99% of it is the Taliban, which it very well could be, but at the same time, they've never actually proven that. You don't know what you're being targeted for. You don't know who's really killing you. You don't know who's watching you at any time. That's a real fear and a real danger for journalists here. On the one hand, it's a physical violence, and then that you don't know really where it's coming from and who's behind it. And on the other hand, it's these sort of efforts to try and quiet people and force them to censor themselves.
I just want to highlight this point that Karim made. Karim said, every day we leave the house or the office thinking we will be killed. It's always running through my head. Will I be killed today, tomorrow? There's a constant feeling of doom, and every phone call I fear it will be about one of my friends or family. It is an awful way to actually be in a career that is this dangerous. Tell us about those feelings, Karim. Are you filled with that much dread?
To tell you the truth, I cannot see my family. My family are living in the capital, but I cannot go to my home or my house to see my family, because of threats, because I don't want to keep in danger my children and my family. So I cannot walk or be in the city. I cannot be with my friends or my family. Our mind is full of threats, and this is important. We see the threats, we see the result of the threats which are happening every week or every day in our country. Around the country, in the past 2 or 3 months, a large number of journalists and media workers, they left their job, especially women. For example, in Mazar Sharif, in Balkh, in the north of our country, when we have a lot of reports that Taliban requested the women to stop their work, their job, and leave the media. Actually, it's general in our country, but very high in the capital, because the capital target killing are increasing day by day.
I wanted to ask you this because you're speaking about the intensity of the threats and the levels of violence, but despite that, that's not a deterrent. You both keep doing your job. What makes you stay in it, Ali?
What else are you going to do? This is what I know how to do, and it's a responsibility towards your people. I can go on international television and convey the message to people all over the world. I can go on a radio or a podcast, or I can write articles and take pictures. And if I can't do this much, then what else can I do? I never believe that term that someone is voiceless, but I think that what we can do is raise someone's voice so it reaches further and higher. And in my opinion, that's all we can do, so we have to do it. Because if we don't, then who will?
Karim?
I'm keeping my job and I'm continuing because of our people and our nation, and because of sacrifices that we paid during 2 decades. So if we stop, who is going to continue? Because of our democracy, because of our future, and because of our country and national interests.
I wonder whether you can each paint me a very personal picture here, and I'm sorry to take you and to remind you of this, but this is very striking. Tell me what it's like when one of your closest friends or colleagues is killed. When you receive that news, what's that like?
I have been shocked, actually, when I lost my colleague during suicide attacks in Kabul, in the capital. He was reporting live coverage in Kabul. We were watching him on the TV. Suddenly, the picture was dark, and he was held by another suicide attacks. So I was shocked. I couldn't speak in 10 minutes. I cried aloud. I was shocked. Killed because of what? Because of Afghan people, because of the country, because of our democracy, and because of our freedom.
The best example I can give is when there was that first attack on Tolo in 2015 or 16. I don't remember, it was 15 or 16, when at least 7 of their workers were killed on a bus in the west side of Kabul. And I remember that there were online accounts saying that a female TV journalist from the station that I knew very well, had become a very good friend, saying that she had been killed. It turned out not to be true. Thank God it turned, and she even called me, she said, Ali, I'm alive, don't worry, don't believe it. But just that feeling, just that thought, it's so much more twisted in that sense, because on the one hand, you're thinking your friend is gone, and then on the other hand, you're finding out she's not, but it's being spread online, and it's being spread in a way that it's making people believe it. It's making people to second guess and to call and make sure that it's not true. When the trend of the so-called Islamic State targeting basically the west side of Kabul, especially the neighborhood Gashtabachi, when that really started, I have a very good friend. He works for a U.S. newspaper. His family lives there. I mean, he's fine, but every time I heard about a bombing in that area or an attack, my first thought would be like, where is he? Is he okay? Just even that thought of having to think about that until you get that message, that panic that sets in, that fear that sets in, it's not right. You shouldn't have to worry that your friend lives on the wrong side of town, or worry that there are these crazy accounts online saying that they killed someone you know.
I cannot imagine that. I mean, we are journalists and we're talking to you, and just listening to the two of you, it makes me realise how safe our journalism is. We're sitting in studios here talking to you, and our hearts go out to you because you are our colleagues doing an important job there. I wondered how your families feel about you doing this job.
Yeah, it's very difficult for our family. My mother is sick actually every day because of me. She is crying and she is requesting me every day to leave the job, to leave the country, to be safe. She is saying, I cannot actually see when you are killed. I speak with her. I say her, this is the way that we have to continue. I request my brothers and my children to continue this way too. When I'm killed, there should be another generation. There should be another chapter of this life, this kind of job here in our country, because we need it. If we want to be a part of a world, and if you want to be a nation, so we have to continue. We have to pay sacrifices. My family, my children, my mother, they are tolerating much problems. My mother is sick every day. She's crying. What to do? I should continue and should speak with her and kiss her hands to allow me to continue to do for my country.
I mean, my family's far away. They're in the U.S., most of them. I have relatives here that every time something happens, they always check and make sure that I'm okay. And, as for my parents, yeah, obviously, every day they're like, why don't you come to the U.S.? Why don't you go somewhere else? Or why don't you sort of almost like censor yourself, just don't say as much, keep more quiet. And a lot of times when I travel to the provinces, they try and hide it from them until I get back. And there are places that I've been that if they knew that, they find out later, but if they knew at the time that it was there, they would be worried the whole entire time. But then on the other hand, they will say, like, make sure the news gets out there, make sure that people know what's going on, tell the truth. As much as they worry, they also do. They also hear from people that, oh, he's doing a good job, let me continue. He's putting information out there.
And Ali, you do have that option of leaving because you have your family in the United States. Is that option, has that ever crossed your mind at all?
This is the thing, okay? So I left this country when I was little, and I didn't have a choice. And if I leave this country now, I don't want it to be because the enemies of this country, make it too insecure and I'm forced out. I want to leave because I want to leave, because I don't know, I found a job, or it's not because the enemies have made the situation so much worse, and then so I have to leave when 30 million other people can't. I was forced to leave once. I don't want to be forced to leave again.
Karim, will you ever consider leaving as your mum advises you to?
So this is the goal of our enemies, that we should leave the country, we should leave our job, because they want a silent community. They want to force us, they want to say to us, we kill you, leave the country. Yes, the leaving is crossing in my mind every minute maybe. I decided to stay here. I decided to work. I decided to be killed for a nation. If I kill for my nation, this is proud of me.
We see the Taliban making gains across Afghanistan. If the Taliban took over the control of Kabul, how will that impact you as a journalist?
I cannot imagine that situation that Taliban came to Kabul. Maybe this is a possibility that they came to Kabul and they captured capital of Afghanistan. So in that time, I don't know what will be happening to us, to our family, or to our friends and colleagues. I cannot say right now, but I'm sure that that time will be full darkness of a part of the world, which is Afghanistan.
I mean, you hope it doesn't happen. Like right now, the biggest trend is that provinces keep falling, and so you're getting calls from all of these different media outlets asking you for information, for updates. So because this is your job and you want to do a good job with it, but then when you finally get to have a break for a minute and you think about it, you realize that your job is reporting your people suffering. Like every time we talk about a province falling or a suicide bombing or a drone strike or a night raid or whatever it is, that in itself is really difficult, especially at a time like this. To some people, like these are just points on the map, but to me, and I know for certain for Karim, these are places we've been to many times. These are places where we know people, and people will say like, oh, God forbid, has Mazar fallen? And it's like, I know they say it because, it's news, but if you have to report something like that, like the impact of it on your society and on your people and on you yourself, if God forbid, like there's a Taliban takeover, on the one hand, you're going to have to report on it for as long as you can until they possibly shut you down. But then on the other, it's also the reality of it. It's not just news, it's actual life. That's why questions like that are so difficult.
Absolutely, and I'm going to make your life even a little bit more difficult by asking you this question. You're both taking such a big risk here, along with all the colleagues there in Afghanistan. At the end of the day, if something were to happen to either one of you, and God forbid that it doesn't happen, would it have been worth it?
Actually, I hope that we close the chapter of Fette, we close the chapter of darkness, we close the chapter of gun. We hate guns, we hate war, we hate fightings. We had different generations that they born in the war, they grew in the war, and they died in the war. So we want to be like other nations. Why? Why us? Why Afghans? Why Afghanistan? What they want from us? The thing that I want to see in my life is an Afghanistan without war, without gun, without killing, and with values of humanity.
I agree with Kabi. You don't want to think of that. You don't want this trend to continue. You don't want this country to keep going down. I remember when my mother came back for the first time in 2013 to visit me. We were arguing about something, and her last night she said to me, you were born in this country in war, you left it in war, you came back in war, and you'll probably leave it again in war. You hope that that doesn't happen. You hope that you're alive for the time when that's no longer the situation. You hope that at some point, as Karim said, you turn the page, you turn the chapter, something new happens, something bright and positive.
Karim and Ali, thanks so much to both of them for speaking with Outside Source, and they were speaking to my colleague, Connie Sharp. You're listening to OS from the BBC World Service. I'm Nuala McGovern. Let's go and get you your sports headlines now. Tim Steer has them. Hi, Tim.
Hi, Nuala. Thanks very much. After a rain-affected start, India have found themselves on top against England on the first day of the second test at Lords. Rohit Sharma impressed with the bats before James Anderson finally found the breakthrough for England, dismissing Sharma for 83. Cheteshwar Pujara was next out for 9, again off the bowling of Anderson. The latest score is currently India are 213 for 2, with KL Rahul on 87 not out. In the 100 tournament, Indian batters Smriti Mandana and Harmanpreet Kaur will not play any further part in the tournament this year. Mandana has been playing for Southern Brave and has been instrumental in guiding her side to the final with 167 runs in 7 innings, but she has decided to return home to see her family before India's series against Australia, which starts on the 19th of September. As for Kaur, she has a quad injury which has seen her miss the Manchester Originals' last 2 games. And Kenya's world record holder and Olympic silver medalist Bridget Kosgei will defend her London Marathon title in this year's race on October the 3rd. The 27-year-old is aiming for a 3rd successive title in London.
Thanks very much.
much, Tim. Right, it's 50 minutes past the hour. You're with OS from the BBC. I want to turn to Nigeria next. Officials there say 80 victims of human trafficking have been rescued in neighbouring Niger. They say the victims, most of them women, were being taken to Libya on the way to Europe. Let me bring in my colleague, Ishaq Khalid, who joins us now from Abuja. Good to have you back with us, Ishaq. What more do we know about this operation?
Well, basically, this is a joint anti-trafficking operation between Nigerian officers and Nigeria's officers in that area. It's a route that illegal migrants usually take when they are traveling to Europe via Libya. And then the commander of the Nigerian Agency for the Prohibition of Trafficking in Persons told the BBC that the suspected smugglers abandoned the victims in a bush and they fled while the officers were tracking them, and most of the rescued victims are young women aged 16 to 35, some of them of course girls, and they were found in a location in southern Niger. They have been taken back to Nigeria at the moment, but the suspects are still at large.
And maybe we don't have any details yet from these young women and girls on how they ended up in that particular circumstance, but we have before read about the trafficking of girls and women to Europe under false pretenses.
Yeah, exactly. And Nigeria is one of the highest, countries with the highest rates of illegal migration to Europe through Libya. Some of them get enslaved or abused or tortured there by trafficking gangs. And what they normally do, they lure these people who are fleeing economic hardship in their countries, hoping to get better living conditions in Europe, but they end up being exploited, working as prostitutes or domestic workers without being paid adequately, and are prevented from returning to their countries by the smugglers. In the first place, they lure them to embark on such dangerous journeys. And if you remember also, apart from the kind of hardship they suffer in Libya and their destination in Europe, they also have the chances of dying on the Mediterranean Sea, because we have had a lot of boat capsizing involving hundreds of or even thousands of migrants from Africa. This year alone, more than 1,000 people have died while embarking on such journeys, according to the International Organization for Migration. So this is a terrible situation, and the people, even though they are facing these kind of things, but some of them are still falling victims to these trafficking gangs.
I understand, and this was a win in a way for Nigerian officials as they did carry out that rescue, but there are more stories to be told, I think, about it. Thank you so much, Ishaq Khalid, joining us from Abuja. Now, I want to turn back to our main story throughout the programme, and that is Afghanistan. We were speaking to my colleague Ambras Nitharajan a little bit earlier. He is our South Asia regional editor. And I want to turn back to him again because Ambras, and some people may not have heard the latest of what is happening with the Taliban as it claims provincial capitals and cities across the country. Can you bring them up to date?
Just a few seconds ago, a Taliban spokesman messaged me saying they had taken Herat and also they are in control of Kandahar, though we don't have any independent confirmation on Kandahar. But several reports and residents in the city of Herat, that is in the western part of the country, close to the border with Iran, has been taken by the Taliban. And the reports also say the government forces and local administration officials have now retreated to an army base outside the city. Now we have seen the Taliban taking at least 11 provincial capitals exactly in a week's time, and the military advance has surprised and shocked many seasoned Afghan watchers, because there was some US intelligence assessment which said it will take at least 6 to 7 months for the Taliban to make such a progress or even to threaten Kabul. But what we are seeing now is within a week, they are now very, very close to Kabul, about 150 kilometers. That is the Ghazni city which fell earlier in the day. So now the Afghan government is really under pressure, even though it says that their soldiers are fighting back in other parts of the country.
Gosh. And so with Herat that you've talked about and looking likely with Kandahar, as you mentioned as well, how does that change the picture in the balance of power for the Taliban?
See, Kandahar and Lashkar, these are the two main cities in the southern part. It used to be a traditional stronghold of the Taliban militants, a Pashtun ethnic belt, and also bordering Pakistan, accusations of militants coming through the Pakistani border, even though Islamabad strongly denies giving any safe havens for the Taliban militants. So the capture of Kandahar and Lashkar would be a significant blow, which means the entire southern part goes to Taliban control. And if you look at the Herat city, it's a very cultural city, a city of lots of academics live there, and that city's fall is also again surprising because one of the warlords, or ex-warlord, Ismail Khan, has been strongly defending the city for all this time, and then suddenly now we hear reports of everyone now fleeing. So this is a shocking thing for even Afghan population because it is not about capturing the city, it is about the way the life is going to change. They are worried, as we heard from some of the colleagues there, some of the people there, about what they are worried about. So it is the way they study, the way they think, it is the way they live, it's all going to change. And no one predicted that this could happen. But another report in Washington Post and US media, quoting intelligence officials, say they expect even Kabul to collapse, even within 90 days.
One question just from my last minute or so. Ibrahim Bahardullah got in touch when he was listening to you last at the beginning of the hour, Ambaras, and he says, could you ask your colleague to talk about the numbers, military size and military power? I'm not looking for specific numbers, but just more the balance of, I don't know, firepower or people when it comes to the Taliban up against these Afghan forces that have been trained by the US.
What Americans would say the Afghan army consists of about 300,000 troops personnel, and they should be able to take on the Taliban because they have been provided with lots of modern weaponry, a small air force, and a military structure, and they have been given battlefield training for all these years. But then if you look at the way Taliban are fighting, and then if you look at where the numbers really play a difference here, because the Taliban fighters are estimated to be between 60,000 and 75,000, and they don't have an air force, and they were able to gain territories mainly by launching guerrilla type attacks. But now they are playing a conventional battle by taking on the Afghan army. So it is highly surprising how the number of cars, the amount of weapons, the money they get, where they come from. If they get all those things, they have proved that numbers do not matter. They were able to take on a numerically superior Afghan army.
Ambaras and Ethamash, just fascinating. Herat, the Taliban has taken, and also looks like they're going to take Kandahar as well. You've been listening to Outside Source.
This is the BBC World Service, with a new series telling the story of one of the most corrupt police squads in American policing history. As members of an elite unit, their job was to seize illegal firearms. Instead, they used their power to steal money and drugs, plant evidence, and even frame innocent people. Bad Cops, the true story of Baltimore's Gun Trace Task Force, Sunday at 9 GMT. And at 17:50 GMT, witness history.
We're going back to the 1950s when a growing number of East Germans were going naked on the beaches, despite the initial disapproval of the country's communist authorities. They were part of a protest movement. They were naturists from a group called the FKK.
This is the BBC World Service, the world's radio station.